All right, so we're kicking off this episode with the trans back out of the car. Fortunately, no big issues or anything. We just need to take care of the open items on the trans, that way we can get it installed in the car for the final time. In the first episode of the series, you guys saw that we put this in alongside the LSR engine, just to kind of do a rough test fit, see if it cleared the floor pan, see what the angles looked like, all just kind of sanity checking the big stuff to see if we were in the ballpark with our installation. And luckily we were, but we knew the whole time that the trans was going to have to come back out so we could take care of all the miscellaneous things. Really the big ones were going to be waiting to get the second part of the torsional damper in from Domi Works, which fortunately we have, so we can install that in the Flywheel. But also finishing up the custom trans cross member. The one that was in the Summit Racing frame bracing kit wasn't in the right location, and it wasn't in one that we could really adapt to work well. So we started putting together our own mount, which I can get under the car and show you guys. So yeah, well, the camera can pick it up, but you can see across there and also over here on this side that there is this piece of sheet metal that is around the tube. So you have the tube from the Summit frame racing kit and then the piece of bent sheet metal there. It's very similar to what was on the Summit racing kit, where it's kind of bent into a U shape, and then it has a flange that comes off with some bolts. Maybe showing the front one will give a little better of a view. So here's the one off the Summit kit. It extends over a little further the frame rail than ours does, but really the important joint is going to be here on the round tube. So it comes over, it has a flange laser cut into the bottom of it, which is where your actual cross member goes. Now this one, we notched the front of for the header, and you can see that the new one is not notched, so that was my bad. I didn't even think of that. I actually forgot that we had made that modification to the Summit one. So we're going to need to basically just mirror that cut and put it on that one. But aside from that, we got to also trim the bolts here. These are a little oversized, which isn't the end of the world. It's mostly an aesthetic thing. I mean, we are pretty tight in a couple places where if there's any rocking motion or movement or anything like that, you know, we might be cutting it real close to the firewall, and we spent a lot of time and effort making that firewall look nice and painted. So if we can take a half hour, trim these bolts, and then alleviate any concerns there, then obviously that makes sense to do. And also we need to fully install the adapter. I mean, that can happen when the trans is in the car, but we might as well just take care of it while it's out. But I think that's all that needs to happen on the trans before it's ready to go in for the final time. Over here with the engine, we got this supported, so we just have the straps and then the After Dark Speed lift mounts up to just set the pitch of the engine so we could control it and drop the trans to get it down. We're actually worried about having clearance with the adapter flange to the firewall, but fortunately it worked out actually very well, better than it did with the T56. I assume because this flange, where it's so big, is significantly shallower than the big bell housing on the T56 that houses like the clutch and the flywheel and whatnot. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought we were going to be fighting with that for a while. So we are going to start taking care of these odds and ends. I might put in a time lapse, maybe not. We'll see if we can make it interesting. But we're just going to take care of those small open items, and then hopefully the next time I'm checking in with you guys, the transmission is actually installed for the final time and we have all the fabrication and sort of mechanical side of things wrapped up. All right, so the trans isn't in yet, but figured I'd check in with you guys, kind of show you step by step what's going on as we wrap up the last couple items to get the trans installed for the last time. So got the new frame side trans mounts all wrapped up. Not sure how well the GoPro is going to get it in the dark here, but we have the old existing mounts here in the front. We actually trimmed the face off those. Those had like the extra inch or so hanging off where it had the bolt hole slot. We don't need that anymore, so we figured we'd buy ourselves some extra clearance on each side, cut those off, and then we got the notch put into the new mounts that we need to clear the exhaust. So that should give us the clearance that we need. These are all painted. A little disappointed that the gloss amount is off side to side. I almost said glare amount, but we're using the same paint that we painted the rest of the chassis with. This is all the KBS coatings, chassis black, or sorry, blacktop chassis satin is the exact shade, I believe. Painted this on, and it's way glossier. So I don't know if that's to do with the fact that it's just a little different formulation now from when I painted the chassis 3 years ago to now, or if that's just it being in a rattle can versus I had brushed the rest of the frame on, or the fact that that other paint is 3 years old now, and it's been through quite a few race days, so it may just be a little beat down, and maybe as the new paint gets dirty and worn in, it'll kind of match. But that's that. Cross members all taken care of, so at least the frame side, as I was saying earlier, the trans side cross member, which is right here, the sheet metal piece, we're going to add in that gusseting here and here. Once everything's in the car, like the exhaust and all that stuff, we can always just pop the cross member in and out. So once everything's in place and we know what restrictions we have, I'll whip something up in CAD and have it laser cut. Like this stuff's all from Cut Sun, so I designed this and then had them CNC bend it and laser cut it too. So we'll have the little gussets put in there, and that'll give us a lot more torsional rigidity. Over here on the trans itself, we got the bolts trimmed down. Originally, I thought we were gonna have to take all the bolts out and trim them, and then we're like, well, it doesn't really make sense to just pull them all out and trim them, you know, something like this bolt up here is out of the way. It doesn't matter if it's a little long. So any of the ones that were clearance issues, which were really just, I think, these three, took them out, cut them, trimmed them. Everything's good, so that means the next step is to get the flywheel and the torsional damper on the engine, which we have laid out on the floor over here. Now, if you have a keen eye or you pick on details, you will realize that this is not the flywheel from the first video in this series, and that is because I foolishly ordered the wrong one. I had ordered a really nice Messier billet flywheel, flex plate, whatever you want to say. I believe flex plate's the right term. And I didn't realize that there's two variations of flex plates for LS engines. One that is totally flat, which is meant to be used with a spacer to adapt it to trans like TH400, so like the old school transmissions. And then there are other ones like this that are stepped. So it has the flat flange that goes against the crank, and then it actually tapers out, so it rises up. Because we'd put the other flex plate on the engine, we were mocking everything up, and it started hitting parts of the block, and I was like, that's strange. So I did a little more research and realized that that type needed a spacer to go behind it, and so ended up returning it. I couldn't get the raised version of that one. It was back ordered at the time, so picked up this, which is just a Jegs one, nothing too crazy, but this has the rise that it needs. We tested on the engine and it works, so that's solved. So be careful with that. Make sure you get one that is for the, I think, more modern transmissions like the 4L80s, things like that. Don't get one of the flat ones. That's intended to be used with a spacer if you're going to do this swap. But regardless, got that taken care of. So now we're over to the torsional damper itself. So this is the two parts of the damper. You know, the way this stacks up is this sits against this and lines up with the holes, and then that bolts to the engine. And then once that's all installed, this is the other side. So this is the side that interfaces with the transmission and then drops in like that. Obviously the holes line up and then you torque it in. And this basically, it's not quite like a torque converter or a clutch. You know, in those cases, those are actually coupling the engine to the trans, whereas this has clutches that take care of that. This is more of a way to smooth out the engagement between the two, and that's what the damper's for. A lot of the kits early on for these DCT swaps just had like a billet solid adapter plate that would go in, and that's really rough when you're trying to just give the transmission that shock from the engine, especially under heavy accelerations, like, you know, in racing conditions, things like that. So the torsional damper basically takes a little bit of that and smooths it out. It's not sloppy and there's not a lot of play, but it's just enough to soften up you know, the engagement between the two. Once this is loaded, then it doesn't matter, but it just helps when, you know, there's that initial shock or change in speed between the two. So DomiWorks has a bunch of different ones of these based off how much torque your engine makes. This is their stage 3 damper, which is good for 1,050 Newton meters. I believe this is the highest torque one they make. We went with that just to, you know, make sure that we're going to have it covered. The engine makes, what, 645 pound-feet, so one to err on the side of caution there. But yeah, that's where we're at. So I think it's finally time to get this thing installed up behind the engine for the final time. So it's not going to be coming back out hopefully for a while. The next time it'll be coming out is because we have catastrophic failure. We don't need to take it out again for anything to do with the swap at this point. So all right, so we got the flex plate and damper all installed. It was pretty straightforward. This was a little tight on the crank. I think it's just because of the buildup of the zinc coating, but got everything in there and just kind of went around sequentially in the circle, alternating, almost like how you would do tightening lug nuts, for example, to suck it all down. And then we tightened the first part of the damper and the flex plate in 2 stages. I believe we did 40 foot-pounds and then 74. That was just the typical torque value we'd found off forums online. And then we got the second part of the damper up here. Same thing, just put it in loosely all the way around. All these bolts got blue Loctite. The bolts that were supplied for the flex plate in the DomiWorks kit had a thread locking compound already on them, so we didn't have to add anything. And then for these, same thing, we went through in a couple steps. I believe we built up to, I think it was 65 Newton meters for the final torque spec. So this is all good to go, and now we're ready to mate up the trans for the final time. All right, so we're at the back end of the car to begin the fuel cell, well, continue the fuel cell installation. We already got the trunk cut out, and we actually got the fuel cell cage itself roughed up. I've talked a little bit about us converting the carver to a fuel cell. It was funny because we originally were doing that to have better clearance for a 3-link and Watts link setup, and then we ended up not doing that for a reason I'll probably talk about in a later video. It's leading to a bigger and cooler project related to the business, but that's a conversation for a future date. But back to the fuel cell. We'd already had it, and I had sold the old fuel tank because at that point we were still progressing and working on designing the 3-link, and so we were kind of forced down into this rabbit hole, I guess you could say. So we're moving forward with it. I mean, it is going to solve an issue that we were having with the car. It's not just about clearance for the 3-link. We did have the fuel starving issue with the car a little bit last year, but more in 2022 when we were doing some track cross stuff and some road course cornering and whatnot, where on the long sweeping corners that you wouldn't really see on an autocross, but you would see on a track cross and road course, the car would fuel starve if it had anything less than, like, I think it was like 2/3 of a tank. And so it'd have lean spots. It'd be very difficult to drive. Obviously, you don't want to hurt the engine with it running lean like that. So this is going to be a way to remedy that. I'll talk a little bit about the specific fuel cell in a bit, but for the gist of mounting it, obviously you need a structure to actually mount the fuel cell to. You can't just drill it into the sheet metal and call it good. So this is a kit from Speedway Motors. We'd considered just building our own kit, but literally for the price, this could not be beaten. Literally to get the amount of a 1" by 1" rectangular tube that is needed, get it shipped here. That was more expensive than the kit before anything else was accounted for. So kind of made this kit a no-brainer. I'll put the part number, the little picture of the kit up on the screen. But it's a universal kit they sell for, I forget what it is, like maybe a 14, 15, 16 gallon fuel cell somewhere in there. And I was reading in between the lines and just looking at the dimensions, and I noticed that it was within an inch in every dimension that we needed for our fuel cell. So it ended up being a little oversized, so we cut it down to the exact size we needed. You can probably see it in there, but we cut out of the bars and TIG welded it together, and then these bars are bolt-in crossbars that run across here. This dimension was fine. We have it disassembled right now because we're basically at the point where it's ready to get sanded and painted. You can see we MIG welded it in seams to get it all installed in here, and I'm actually surprised at how rigid that is. I was a little leery about tying it into the sheet metal of the trunk. I mean, obviously we're grabbing some of the bracing that's implemented in the factory trunk that is what the gas tank suspends off of. But I figured it was going to be a little flimsy, and I wasn't so sure about it. But it ended up actually working out really well. This is far stiffer than it ever has been before, and we're not going to have an issue with the fuel cell in here. Can come down under the car so you guys can see it a little bit better. So this is the bottom side. Obviously, like I was saying, we have the crossbars that go across here. You can see the bolt hole where the crossbar bolts in. So this is what it looks like from the bottom side of the car. We ended up tucking the fuel cell up, which you can see here with these bars being raised up, just for clearance on the bottom of the car. I don't know if you can see down here, but the cage doesn't stick down too far, but that's because we offset it up. I've seen in a lot of cars, especially kind of track only cars, where the fuel cell is pretty low, which obviously is beneficial for center of gravity and handling and whatnot, but then you have no ground clearance. So even if a racetrack's flat, little undulations or trying to get the car in and out of the trailer just becomes a nightmare. And so we figured we'll move it up a couple inches. Yeah, it's not theoretically the best, but in reality, it's probably the best way to do it. And then for the top side here, we have little straps that run across and then bolt on. That's what will suck the fuel cell down. I have little pieces of isolation rubber strip that I got. It's I think 1/8 inch thick that we'll have on the bottom there and then on top of the straps. So I'm gonna work on getting this prepped and painted, and then we'll start assembling the fuel cell and get that dropped in the car. All right, so we got the fuel cell cage all painted here. We ended up using the Rust-Oleum, I believe it's called Texture Black. It's sort of a matte, not quite a crinkle coat, but it has a little bit of a texture to it. It's kind of like a speckled texture. Very similar to like a spatter paint that you would use in these trunks, which is actually what the rest of it is. We painted just the areas we needed to, so like the areas we welded and had prepped for weld, and then the bars themselves. Didn't paint the whole trunk because we're going to be making some changes this upcoming winter to the car. I say minor, but you know, these things spiral out of control, so we'll see. But we already know we're going to be making some changes in here, so it doesn't really make sense to prep and paint the whole trunk when we know we're going to be in here again doing some fab work. So we're going to wait until we make those changes, then we'll go through and we'll probably paint the whole trunk in this paint. Not the prettiest for right now, but it's enough to get it done and get the car racing, because honestly we're running out of time. We're getting to the point where if I try and make everything absolutely perfect, we're just not going to have the car racing this year. So kind of need to know what is the minimum that we need to do things, you know, pretty right, get the car together, and what's a nicety and what can wait, and fully repainting the trunk's a nicety that can wait until the off season. So we painted the top with the Rust-Oleum textured paint, but the bottom's actually painted with the blacktop top coat to match the rest of the car. Same thing, the finish is a little glossier than the rest of it, so it's like where we've used it elsewhere on the frame. We'll just kind of have to see how it wears and how it plays out once we're actually racing the car. It gets a little dirty, things like that. So in theory at this point the fuel cell is ready to drop in, but before we drop the cell in, we have a couple things we need to do to the rear end. Fortunately, it's not because the rear end's broken like we dealt with a lot last year. This is just a couple changes for the other things we're doing on the car. First off is going to be changing out the wheel hubs here. These are from a company called Mechanical Power Incorporated. We carry these, we sell them on the website. This is a good alternative to SKF bearings. So it's a C601 style assembly with the wheel speed sensor, which obviously we need for the dual clutch transmission, for traction control, ABS. You know, it's really critical to have these front and rear. And so these ones we installed ARP studs in, which is another thing we offer through the business. These don't come with ARP studs, but if you buy them from us, you do have the option. So if you're running these hubs on your Pro Touring muscle car, or even, you know, more modern sports car, Corvette, F-body, things like that, we have these and we get you set up with them. So feel free to shoot us an email or even go on the website and you guys can check them out there. But we have the hubs already on the car. Obviously last year we converted it to the Miller built floater kit, which uses the Corvette hub, but it uses one without a wheel speed sensor, because I mean really 90% of people, if not more, who run these hubs don't really have a need for a wheel speed sensor. So in order to keep the costs down, you see a lot of kits that use Corvette hubs, so like the Miller built kit, or even if you buy a lot of spindles like the SpeedTech AFX spindle, they don't come with wheel speed sensor hubs. So we need to rip those out and replace them with these guys. And then the other change we're going to be doing is adding these axle tube seals in. Now these go in the axle tubes, like right outside the carrier. These are from a company called Seals It, who is actually pretty local to us. It was funny when I looked up their business and saw, I was like, oh, it's not too far away. So a small world, I guess. But these are going to go into the axle tubes and help contain fluid in the center. I mean, these are fully sealed bearings, so we don't really have a need for them to get lubricated with fluid. When you assemble them, you use like high pressure grease, and then they don't really have a need to get actively lubricated outside of that. If you think of their use case in a Corvette, you know, they sit in a hub upright in an IRS, and that has no way of being actively lubricated, so it doesn't really need it. And you can actually see here a little bit of remnants of spray, because we were having a tough time getting these end caps to fully seal. They would want to kind of walk off sometimes, or I think over time the seal had swelled a little bit and it just wasn't the best. So we put new seals on them, I believe 2 or 3 months ago, and it seemed just when we were assembling it to have sealed better, so which may have solved the issue, but we're also like, we don't want to deal with that headache. There's a couple autocrosses we had done where that started leaking, so it ended our day early, because you know, we're starting to get fluid leaking out of this and into the wheel, and obviously you don't want to make a big mess or, you know, have something go wrong from that. So we're going to put these in, and that'll eliminate that, but it also helps keep fluid in the center section, which is good. You know, you see a lot of like circle track cars and road race cars that use an IRS use these, because when you start pulling a lot of lateral load and moving, your fluid's going to come down the axle tubes, which isn't a place where it really needs to be. and you're moving away from the center section, which is the part that desperately needs the fluid for lubrication. So we already have the center section and axle tubes out of it, so we're gonna put these into the tubes. It's pretty straightforward. You just pop them in, and then we're gonna put a like a bead of minute gasket around the edge and let it set up, and then that should be good. So that should take care of those issues and also give us potentially a little more reliability benefit. I mean, I don't know how much reliability we're getting with a 10-volt Oldsmobile that we're about to stuff 700 horsepower through and now launch control, but we're trying to mitigate the failure as much as we can, though. I have a bad feeling that ring and pinions and center sections are probably going to be consumables this year, so we're going to get going on this. Maybe toss in a time lapse, maybe not. We'll see. I've been having bad luck with the GoPro crashing during time lapses, but we're going to get started on this and then get the fuel cell installed, and then we can start wrapping up the back of the car. Well, unfortunately no time lapse since yet again the GoPro didn't want to cooperate, but got the hubs installed. Really nothing too special here. It's the 3 bolts on the triangular flange. Take the old one out and then pop the new ones in. Obviously with the wheel speed sensor you need to be cognizant of routing of the actual wheel speed wires themselves. On the Miller-built floater kit, they have a little hole here that doesn't have a specific purpose. When you buy the kit, it's just plugged with a little pipe plug, but you can use it for things like this. So we took that pipe plug out, unpinned the connector, fed the 2 plugs through the hole. We put minute gasket in there just to help seal it up. I mean, in theory, fluid shouldn't be getting down to the ends of the tubes now since we have those seals towards the center of the diff to help hold the fluid there. But if any fluid were to get down here, that'll hold it in and also prevents dust and moisture from getting into the assembly, which is arguably the more important thing here. Then we have them wrapped around and up and then zip tied with a stainless steel zip tie, because you do not want a piece of plastic that close to your brakes, because that's just begging to be melted and then have a wheel speed failure, which would not be ideal if your ABS magically goes away. So just trying to think ahead and be smart about what parts we use and where. So that's in there, and that really wraps up the install. I mean, in theory, this is ready to get the rotor pop back on. We just left it off just so we could get everything in place, mocked up, and just have full visibility and access to everything. We'll put the rotors on last, but yeah, pretty straightforward. So that wraps up our wheel speed install. I have the new ones on the hubs up front, which I'll talk about in a future video. But really that covers all of our changes to the rear end. So everything's taken care of back here, and now we can go ahead and get the fuel cell installed. So we got the center section on the diff all wrapped up and we're ready to drop in the fuel cell, but before we actually install it, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fuel cell itself. Now this is our 15-gallon fuel cell from Aerotech Laboratories, aka ATL. They're a pretty popular fuel cell manufacturer. Talk a little bit why we went with this particular tank was really the capacity and the sizing dimensions. I mean, when it comes to a fuel cell or custom installation, really you can do whatever you want, but there are some things you want to be cognizant of. First thing is packaging. In muscle cars like this A-body here, most classic muscle cars, they have pretty big trunks. The factory fuel tank's pretty big, so you have a lot of footprint to work with. So your length and width on these isn't really a problem so much as it would be on maybe some more compact cars like a Miata or something, for example, or you have less of an area that you can fit it in. But really the big thing to be cognizant of is the height dimension here. This one is on the shorter side, but it's still, I think, 9.5 or 10 inches from the bottom of the flange to the bottom of the cell. And I talked a little bit about that when we were talking about the fuel cell cage that we installed in the trunk, how we'd shifted it up. And we still had to do that even though this is one of the shorter 15-gallon cells that's available on the market. There's other ones out there, like I was saying, that are even taller, so it would be even more of an issue. And so you could say, well, why don't you just go with a smaller fuel cell? It's a race car, you're doing autocross, some time attack stuff, you don't really need 15-gallon capacity. Well, we want to have that flexibility. Even though we do stuff that we could probably get away with like a 5-gallon cell, it's nice to have that extra headroom of capacity where if you're going out, say for like a first session for a road course event and you're just trying to learn the track and turn laps, you want to have more fuel on board. Or if you're doing a racing event, hypothetically, where you have to race and then drive the next day to do another race somewhere else, and then you have to drive the next day, if we were to do something like that this year, maybe next year, maybe both years, it's a lot more convenient to have that fuel on board where you're not having to stop every 15 minutes to fill up a 5-gallon cell. So we were able to package this in the car, and so we can always run it low if we want to, and we're getting kind of the best of both worlds in my opinion. So we have the space to put in 15 gallons if we're going out for a longer session or if we're driving around the street, or we can just run it down to, you know, lighten the load in the back of the car if we want, and we get the benefit of having a smaller fuel cell. And although it's a fuel cell and it's, you know, race car-esque and stuff, there is still some fuel starvation concerns in here. Just by going to a cell doesn't necessarily eliminate all of them, which is why we have this guy right here, which is Fuel Labs Quick Service Surge Tank, I believe it's called, QSST. And so what this does is it takes the place of this flange right here. This is kind of a universal, I forget if it's 24 volt or how many it is, flange. So this comes out and this takes its place. And so you can see, looks pretty cool. It's got a few different things on it. You have over here, the actual surge tank itself, which you can see is its own little chamber. And then you have a little fuel pump nozzle here with wirings for what's called the lift pump. And basically the way it works is the lift pump sits exposed to the full fuel cell. And so we have one of the pumps here. We're running twin 340 liter per hour pumps. So this one will be the lift pump. It'll install there. That'll be pulling fuel directly out of the fuel cell itself and into the surge tank. And then from the surge tank itself, there's a second 340 liter per hour pump that'll actually send the fuel out to the engine. And so what that does is basically eliminate any fuel starvation issues because you have that buffer of the surge tank. So even if you're cornering hard or stopping or whatever, and the fuel comes away from your lift pump, there's enough fuel in here to offset that. So it becomes basically a non-issue where you can run the cell super low, you know, 2-3 gallons and still go out there and not have an issue, which addresses a problem that we had faced a lot over the last couple of years. So we're very happy to have this in there and resolve it. So we need to get this installed in the tank, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit as we're going. It's pretty straightforward. You just need to set this depth, make sure it's set right on the hanger for the actual tank you're working with, because this is more of a universal setup. The hangers are sized for specific tank ranges, but you still need to go in there and set it. We also need to put in the fuel level sending unit, same thing that occupies that, and then you need to set the depth. It's not too different from if you were installing a new sending unit or pump in a factory tank. It's a very similar procedure, even though this looks quite different. It's not too different. So we're gonna get started on this so we can actually get this dropped in the car, and I'll check in with you guys as we make some progress on that. All right, so a bit of a mess here, but we're slowly making some headway on putting the fuel cell surge tank together. First thing we did was take off the old sending unit / flange assembly, and then we also had to carve out a little bit of the foam. Per the installation instructions, you gotta take the foam away or any obstructions or anything for the lift pump, but also for the sending unit. So you can see that we got one of the pumps in there already, the depth set, we got the fuel sock on there, hose is hooked up, we added the loop per their request, and then also got the wire soldered in. This is kind of strange, they have you solder them directly to these posts. Originally we'd put eyelets on it, you know, thinking it's like any other fuel pump assembly where you put eyelets on with a nut. That's not the case, so I had to disassemble it. So I guess that's a testament to the importance of actually reading the instructions and not just assuming you know how to put things together. So that's all good, and now we have the actual surge tank flange assembly out of there. So we just got to go through and do the same thing. This has provisions for 2 pumps in case you're on like big horsepower. You need to run dual pumps. We don't. We have the single pump there and then the single pump here. So this is, I believe, like a check valve. So that way you can just run one pump. You don't have to worry about pumping in and then going straight out the other line. So we're going to basically go through and do the same process of setting the pump height, except this time we're going to the bottom of the surge tank and then wire it up, do all the same stuff. And then this will be good to drop in the fuel cell. And then we get the fuel cell finally installed in the car. Well, it wouldn't be hot rodding if there wasn't at least a little bit of surprise fabrication on parts that are supposed to work together. We went to drop the surge tank in and none of the bolt holes were lining up. And we're like, what's going on here? It's a universal pattern for fuel cells. I had to double check because I was panicking a little bit thinking I had somehow messed that up, but I confirmed it, we were good. There is only one bolt pattern for this kind of stuff. And so I'm looking at it, I'm like, why doesn't this work? You know, they even reference ATL cells in their instructions for the surge tank, so obviously there's compatibility there. And then we were looking around at things and we had noticed the issue was on the inner part of the cell. So fuel cells, like this one at least, are constructed as 2 pieces. So you have the outer metal case and then Inside is the actual, I'm not sure if it's plastic or what it is, but the actual cell itself that holds the fuel. So you can see it's kind of free floating in there. And so we shifted it, aligned everything, but it was still off. None of the holes would line up. And so I laid the gasket on there, and I laid the gasket on the surge tank assembly, and the actual surge tank itself was extremely close to the inner edge of the gasket, like millimeter perfect. And so then I laid the gasket back on here, and I noticed when this hole was cut, it followed the gasket on the edges, but the contours on the ends didn't really follow the gasket. So basically this was sticking out too far and hitting this and then preventing the actual holes from aligning on the flanges. So I grabbed our trusty Milwaukee Sawzall and then our little flat disc and cleaned this up. Not the end of the world, doesn't impact anything from functionality of the fuel cell. And I didn't really feel great about taking a Sawzall to a brand new fuel cell, but that's how it is. You know, it needed to happen to make it work. So luckily it wasn't anything too crazy of a fix, just trimming a little bit of plastic. We took all the foam out of the cell, because obviously if you have to do any work like this, you don't want any debris getting trapped in the fuel cell foam. You know, you want to keep it as clean as possible, and then let your filters do as little work as possible. So we took that out. I got that all trimmed up. So now I'm gonna use our shop vac, clean it out again. I vacuumed it once last night, but just give it, you know, one more once over to make sure we're good. Then we're actually good to install the surge tank and then get this dropped in the car. All right, so completely ignore what I said in the last clip. This is not a check valve. I figured because I ordered the fuel cell surge tank set up for one pump that this would be a check valve, and that's how that mechanism works. It wouldn't just recycle fuel or recirculate it in the tank. Then we blew into one of the tubes and it came straight out the other, so I was wrong. Evidently they just sent me the wrong fuel cell surge tank. So if you order one for a single pump and it comes with this guy in there with two hoses, don't use it because it's not gonna work. It's actually a pretty common connector. I don't know what the specific type of connector is called, but they're pretty abundant. They're used in a lot of fuel injection systems, and from what I've seen in my research, apparently pretty popular in the diesel world for like OEMs. No idea what it is, but I was able to get one off Amazon, and we got the cell in. So looks very cool now that it's in there. We still got some of the tools off from doing the wiring. But we're really happy with how the install turned out. You know, it's kind of nerve-wracking cutting a big hole in the trunk, and then we're like, you know, is it going to work? How is this going to look? Because, you know, there's always that uncertainty, even though you can kind of envision what it's going to look like or how it's going to sit with everything installed. Once you start cutting parts out of the car and there's kind of no turning back, you start to get a little anxious about how things are going to work out. But luckily it worked out well. Really happy with it. Not too intrusive on the top side or on the bottom side. So I think I think we're in a pretty good spot. This is, you know, a big safety increase, but also it's going to fix the fuel sludge issue we had. And as we push the car towards more and more of a hardcore race car, time attack car, things like that, this is definitely the better direction to go in. Didn't necessarily have to happen right now, since you know, we were originally really doing this for the 3-link and the Watts link. That didn't end up happening, but if anything, it solves one of the issues we're battling, so now we can run the car a little lower on fuel. But just to recap all the parts we used, it's the Speedway Motors universal fuel cell cage that we cut up to fit. This is an ATL, I think it's an SP115 tank. Fuel Lab quick service surge tank, it's a mouthful, QSST. And then we have their dual 340 liter power pumps. So we have all the wiring run off the main loom here. We'll tuck that away once we're done wiring, but you can see we have our fuel fill. I'm not sure how long that's gonna last. It's kind of a pain to A, open the trunk, and then B, you have to lean, you know, a good bit in. I'm gonna be buying a screw-on pump from a company called Terra Pumps that we can just put on our fuel cells. So that way when the car's on the ground, you can just drop a cell or drop a tank at the back bumper, then run the pump with the hose over to the cell, versus trying to pour like a 5-gallon cell, or can't speak, 5-gallon tank into the cell. So we'll see. They make like a remote nozzle kit that could give you a little hose and a fill cap that we could mount like over here. It was like $350, which is kind of a rip-off for a little bit of hose and another cap. So we'll see. We'll give this a shot, see how much of a pain it is to work with. You know, it might not be too bad, and then it's fine. We'll just leave it and not overcomplicate things. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to end this video. We got pretty much all the fab work for the revamp and the changes done. You know, we got the mounts in for the trans, we got the trans in for the final time, and then we got the fuel cell in. So not maybe the most exciting video in the world, but it's all necessary evil, and all these little things add up to a really cool end result. So really happy to start seeing the car come together. There's some other cool things going on at the front of the car that pertain to some GPE products that I can't show you guys yet. Kind of hush hush on some prototype parts up there, but it'll be really, really cool once we take the covers off those. But yeah, the car is slowly coming together. I think up next is going to be chipping away on the ABS install, and then really start digging into the controls side, because I know I've roughly talked about getting the harnesses in, routing it, but once we actually get into setting up the control side, that's where you'll really get an understanding for the PDM, how we're integrating the Hall Tech with the trans controller, and how the system's all going to work together on this new version of the car. So that's all I got for you guys. Sorry it's been a little break in content. Honestly, it's just because I haven't really touched the car. We've had a ton of really cool business projects going on. We hosted another autocross. We have some more exciting projects coming up that I can't talk about yet, but I can soon. And so the car's just been sitting, but we're getting to the point now where we really got to kick it into gear and not rush, but move in a timely manner to get this thing together so we can actually get it out and get racing again. Currently, we're filming this in mid-May, and we're aiming to have the car together and somewhat sorted, not perfect, but raceable for our next event at Lime Rock Park on June 29th, the Summer Showdown. We're doing a really cool shootout event there for a $500 cash prize, and I'd love to have the Ols come out and race. It's undefeated at our autocross events, even though it's only raced at one of our autocross events. So yeah, we'll see what we can do. You know, we're coming up on a year since the engine failed at Muscle on the Mountain, and it's kind of surreal. I can't believe it's been down that long. I remember when the car blew up and we're like, oh yeah, it'd only be a couple week turnaround. And then, you know, here we are, went down the rabbit hole and doing all these big changes. But I'm rambling at this point. So yeah, that's episode 2 of the revamp series. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one when we start doing the ABS install and chipping away on the controls.